The UK government claims to be a leader on climate change, but its actions tell a different story. In this video, we will expose how the UK has spent £680 million of its foreign aid budget on fossil fuel projects since 2010, despite signing the Paris Climate Agreement. Fossil fuels are the main cause of global warming and climate change. They emit greenhouse gases that trap heat in the atmosphere and raise the Earth's temperature. Burning fossil fuels also pollutes the air, water and soil, harming the health and livelihoods of millions of people around the world. You might think that the UK's foreign aid is meant to help poor countries develop in a sustainable and equitable way. But instead, the UK has been supporting carbon-intensive energy projects that benefit big corporations and wealthy elites, while locking developing countries into a fossil fuel dependency that will make them more vulnerable to climate impacts. According to a study by CAFD and the Overseas Development Institute, the UK has provided £7.8 billion in financial support to foreign energy projects from 2010 to. Of this amount, 60% went to fossil fuels, while only 15% went to renewable energy sources like wind and solar power. Most of this support came in the form of export credit guarantees by UK Export Finance, a government agency that helps British companies win contracts abroad. Some examples of the fossil fuel projects that received UK backing are: oil refineries in Kuwait that produce 800,000 barrels of oil per day, offshore oil and gas fields in Ghana that threaten marine ecosystems and fishing communities, offshore oil platforms in Brazil that have been linked to corruption scandals and environmental disasters. These projects not only contribute to global emissions, but also undermine human rights, democracy, and development in the countries where they operate. They often displace local people from their lands, create conflicts over resources, and fuel corruption and inequality. The UK's support for fossil fuels overseas contradicts its own commitments to reduce greenhouse gas emissions at home and abroad. In 2015, the UK signed the Paris Climate Agreement, which aims to limit global warming to well below 2 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels, and pursue efforts to limit it to 1.5 degrees Celsius. To achieve this goal, scientists say that we need to phase out fossil fuels as soon as possible and shift to 100% renewable energy by. In 2019, the UK Parliament declared a climate emergency and the government announced plans to cut greenhouse gas emissions to net zero by. In 2020, the UK government said it would end direct support for fossil fuels overseas, making it the first major economy to do so. However, this policy has many loopholes and exemptions that allow some forms of fossil fuel financing to continue. The UK also has a responsibility to help developing countries cope with the impacts of climate change, which are already affecting millions of people who have done the least to cause it. The UK has pledged to provide £11.6 billion in climate finance between 2021 and 2025, but it is unclear how much of this will go to adaptation and resilience measures, and how much will be new and additional money. The UK has an opportunity to show real leadership on climate change by aligning its diplomatic, trade and aid policies with the goals of the Paris Agreement. This means ending all forms of support for fossil fuels overseas, increasing support for renewable energy and energy access for poor communities, and providing adequate and predictable climate finance for adaptation and mitigation. As citizens, we can demand that our government stops funding fossil fuel tycoons with our money and starts investing in a clean and fair energy future for all. We can also take action in our own lives by reducing our carbon footprint, switching to green energy suppliers, divesting from fossil fuel companies, and joining campaigns and movements for climate justice. Together, we can make a difference and hold our government accountable for its actions on climate change. In this section, we will talk about how the UK government has announced a new policy to end its support for the fossil fuel energy sector overseas from March 31. This is a major policy shift that will have significant implications for the global fight against climate change. The UK government has been supporting the fossil fuel energy sector overseas through various means, such as export finance, aid funding and trade promotion. According to the government, in the last 4 years, it supported £21 billion of UK oil and gas exports through these channels. However, this support has been widely criticised by environmental groups and campaigners, who argue that it contradicts the UK's commitment to the Paris Agreement and its goal of reaching net zero emissions by the new policy, announced by Prime Minister Boris Johnson at the Climate Ambition Summit on December 12, 2020, will end direct government support for new crude oil, natural gas or thermal coal projects overseas, with very limited exceptions. The policy will be implemented after a short period of consultation and is intended to come into force as soon as possible, and before COP26 next November. The policy will also apply to indirect support, such as technical assistance and capacity building. The government claims that this policy will expedite the shift to supporting green technology and renewable energy, creating jobs across the UK and driving international growth in the industry. The government also says that it will work with the UK's oil and gas sector to support the transition to low-carbon energy sources through the North Sea Transition Deal, ensuring areas like Teesside and Aberdeen can become global hubs for wind energy, carbon capture and other clean technologies of the future. The policy has been welcomed by many environmental organizations and experts, who see it as a world-leading move that sets an example for other countries to follow. For instance, Fatih Birol, Executive Director of the International Energy Agency, IEA, said,